Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Johnny, say hello again to our great friend, Marcy Stoudt.
Hey, Marcy. Great to see you again. Thanks for joining us again on the podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Great to see both of you.
So, Marcy, you and I had some conversations over the last few months, and you're on to another successful, I don't want to say on to, because you still have Revel Coach, and you are now embarking in the search field with Revel Search. Tell us a little bit about your thinking of going into that. Why did you do that, and kind of what's out there in the marketplace that makes you do that?
Yeah, well, it was one of those stories where when you start a company, when you go out on your own, you have a confidence of what you're good at. And then you're like, just stay in your lane. And for me, I started first with Revel Coach because I really love the leadership aspect of coaching. And so with starting Revel Coach, was, the premise was working with organizations that wanted to solve three problems. And the problems were anything with a revenue boost, or a better people plan, or preventing burnout and healing burnout. So it was kind of hard to be in those conversations and not talking about how they're attracting and retaining top talent. And so often my work, when I was working with those clients on the Revel Coach side, it really came down to how are they best practices around recruiting and best practice around getting those people. So it's such a natural progression because a lot of my clients are like, can you just do this for us?
Yeah.
And so it didn't take too long to go back to my roots, and really, I feel like my DNA is in recruiting. I've always loved connecting people, and I love the industry. So it's been a great endeavor to have this complimentary service.
Yeah, as we said in the opening, you have an unbelievable amount of experience, over 22 years in corporate America with one of the greatest search companies and search and delivery companies on the planet. Let's talk a little bit about some of these problems, though, because in the data that you sent us, I knew that these were in bad shape, but I had no idea that they are what they are. New hires, just let me set the stage with a few of these, John. We've seen this before, but I don't think we've seen data like this. It says 30% of new hires wash out in the first 90 days. 30% of new hires. 43%, when they interview them, they survey them, 43% are leaving because of poor expectations, the wrong expectations. 32% of them are leaving because of unfavorable culture. Let's talk about another one. 1% talk about lack of productivity and lack of balance and productivity inside of a company. 1% of the talent creates 10% of the production of the company. And the top 5% create 20% of the production. So that's an alarming productivity stat for me. And then this one really hit home for me because I'm always harping on it by telling, our audience and anybody who listen that you have to have an environment where what you do matters. Only 20% of U.S. employees are passionate about their jobs. Only 20% of U.S. employees believe what they do matters. And so those are alarming, Marcy. And can you sent us that data. Did that have something to do with what you were seeing out in the marketplace?
I mean, 100%. So, when I'm thinking about this conversation and thinking about some of your listeners, if you just get one thing right, is know exactly who you are hiring, like the work that they're going to do and how they'll be successful almost immediately. If you really get clear on why you are hiring this person, why you're funding this position, and then you make the time to make sure you are sourcing from many markets, from many different types of communities and things like that. People think their referral source is dry, and it's just not a thing. What is dry is people making the effort to find the best talent. So if you know who you're hiring and why you're hiring them, then you treat that interview process as if it's the person you think you need, you start that interview process right away and you start giving that great experience from the very beginning. So before you give the offer, you either know they're going to be great on your team or you don't move forward. And that's, to me, the most important part is just, you got to get the people right. And if you get that right, everything else is so much easier down the road.
Well, Marcy, in my experience, when I've gone around to different companies, what I found is maybe 1 out of 10 have actually built a profile of what they're really looking for, and the expectations of that job with the job responsibilities. Because a lot of times when they're churning a lot of people, they'll have me come in and talk to them. And then the first question I'll ask is, okay, so show me at least one piece of paper that shows me the profile of the candidate that you're looking for. It's non-existent.
Yeah. It's crazy. It seems so obvious. There's assumptions when you're hiring maybe a technology sales rep. There's an assumption what that job description looks like. And because you ask a leader what's most important, you'll say, my people. But then you ask them, well, show me on your calendar how you're showing hiring people is a priority. And they don't have really much time dedicated. And so the piece of paper that you're talking about, John, is just, a lot of us call it the employee value prop. It's really knowing, because every company has enough of a nuance that every person's not going to be the superstar in your organization, but there is somebody out there, but you miss them because you're just maybe recruiting the wrong person. You don't know what you're recruiting for. You get desperate. That's a big trap, is leaders just do not make the time. And then their back's against the wall and they are saying, I guess this is the right person we need to go with because this is the best of the ones we've interviewed.
Yeah, which is always so shocking to me, because for me as a leader, I've always thought it's all about the people that I recruit that's going to define my career and how well I do in this job. It's all about that. So for leaders that are just not paying attention to it or abdicating those responsibilities to HR or somebody else for who they're going to put on their team and define their career and how well they're going to do in that job, just blows my mind.
When you have one of the best legacies, I know, both of you, with talent that you've hired, interact with, promoted, all the types of things, like, you've got such a great legacy. So we almost could end this interview right now with that comment that you just made, John, because it is the most important thing. Who you bring on is the start of your legacy, and how you treat them. The one statistic is the first 90 days, they are either updating their resume or they're figuring out how to kick everybody's ass. And it's just that simple. So they're staying on the market or they're figuring out how to win. So if you are the leader and you really want your team to be successful 18 months from now, 3 years from now, you're doing the right things. You're investing in the interview process and getting to know this person in a way that they will be successful, for the trajectory.
Yeah. And some of that goes to, what you were doing as a leader in onboarding this person. So I didn't do it when Johnny and I worked together, but after that, I would always hold the managers accountable for the rep that we hired had to get their first deal. That manager was responsible. So therefore, they weren't paying attention to all the existing reps that were bringing in, the big deals that they wanted to attach themselves to. They knew they had a responsibility to help this rep find their first deal and close their first deal. You put the onus on the leader.
Let's break this down a little bit, though. For a couple of things I want to do in this conversation. So there's obviously, Marcy, and I think you probably taught me this years ago. There's sourcing, networking, and recruiting. There's interviewing. There's onboarding. Let's use that as a little bit of a framework as we go forward. And the other thing is, Johnny, we see this all the time in the sourcing component. It's the same thing as we ask a customer, what's your ideal customer profile? When we ask them about the deals that they're going after, the market space, their differentiation, it's amazing to us, John and I, it's amazing to us how many people are just kind of like, well, basically revenue is revenue. And we know that's not the case, but because they don't have that ideal customer profile. Now, what you guys have just highlighted is this ideal candidate profile. But Marcy and Johnny, as we keep going through this, I want to hit it from two lenses, because in sourcing, there's a lens for the hiring company and there's a lens for the candidate. And in interviewing and screening, there's a lens for both of those. And on onboarding, there's a lens for both of those. So I just want to make sure, Marcy, we hit, because a lot of our listeners are, okay, well, maybe I'm not a hiring manager, but I'm in this mode right now where I'm thinking I'm in that 90 days. I'm thinking about either kicking butt or leaving. So let's hit it through those two lenses. So Marcy, for me, when I talk to leaders, they all say the same thing. If I could just get some great candidates, our internal recruiters, they suck. They don't do this. The external recruiters, they suck. They just send me a bunch of resumes. This has been 30 plus years, 40 plus years of looking at this problem. The comments are all the same. What do you think that's due to?
I just think people don't make the time. The companies that get larger, when you own your own company, that's all you care about. That's all you do is figure out, how do I hire the right people so I can depend on them? But if you join a company that's large, there's a department that handles that, and then you can criticize them. There's people that are going to do the onboarding, but you somehow you lose the ownership. So then you get too busy to do the right things. But John, I'll tell you, this is one of my favorite hacks to find good referrals for your company. So if you depend on your internal recruiting department or, a third-party recruiting company, you're just depending on them. You're like, well, let me see what you bring up, right? Well, that's not the best strategy, because you're 1 degree away from this phenomenal hire. You just need to figure out how to, source them and tap into those markets. So what I love is think about an upcoming, say, an all hands meeting, a staff meeting, a weekly meeting, and say the meetings are typically, say, an hour. And whoever typically has the agenda, you say, hey, I'm taking the whole thing. You surprise the entire company. So say there's 20 people on the call, 50 people on the call, doesn't matter. And you get them all fired up about the job, like their job, the company, like, what do we stand for? Why do we win? Just get them super fired up. Like they cannot wait to do more for the company. Once you have them there and there's like enough momentum going there, like, all right, we're going to cancel the rest of the meeting. Everybody has 45 minutes to call at least 3 people to try and get our internal recruiter, our third-party recruiter, me, interviews. I want at least three contacts. And then you do just a little bit of you have the sales, like a little bit of prospecting, like where are we going to find the people? And somebody's going to start saying, well, I'm tapped. And you just go through well, didn't you play, college sports? How about you call your old university? Or someone like, what about church? You're into church. Are there small groups? Is there a posting there? You have so many different resources, but my favorite resource is call your customers. Your customers know so many good people. So if you did a meeting like that, I'm telling you, in 45 minutes, you'll have at least, a dozen or so really good quality people looking for people. And by the end of the week, you've got, a whole new source of referrals. So that's one of the favorite things.
Let me give a little nuance to the customer one, because I believe that wholeheartedly. But what I did find when I called customers and asked them who their great people were, I put myself in the situation of the customer. I didn't want to give those names because I'm lucky. Salespeople are hard to deal with. And if I have good sellers that are selling to me from other, vendors or what have you, I want to keep them. So another way to think about it, and this is actually how I believe, this is how they told me I got hired at PTC. They said, who calls on you that you have a tremendous amount of respect for, but for whatever reason, you don't buy from them? And in my case, I was up in Western Michigan where there was this local integrator that was from that area, and it was very, very specific to that area, and my name kept popping up. And so I found that is a great way when you call customers, say, hey, who are some people that you really, really like that you would buy from, but for whatever reason, they don't have a contract with your company or what have you? That's a really good place to start, because I find that people are less likely to say, well, Marcy Stoudt, she's awesome, I'd give you her name, or John McMahon, they're awesome, because I don't want you to take them.
Yeah, true. But it's also, when you're connecting with the customer, it's a great opportunity to kind of remind them of, the company culture or what it takes to win, like why they care about customer experience. So it's a double-edged sword. Like you can
get them excited about it. We're like, hey, we're hiring, and and by the way, if you get somebody on the phone, this is the differentiation, just to remind you or what have you. You get customers excited, because if you're not excited about it, why should anybody else be? Right? Yeah,
exactly.
this is where the work. This is where the work. I find sourcing is about the work. Sourcing is the work. You got to put it in. What other ideas do we have for sourcing?
I mean, to me, like, okay, what the best recruiters do, first of all, one, they know exactly what the client is looking for. So whether you're a recruiter internal or external, or you're just in charge of finding people, that whole thing of knowing what you're hiring for, people are vague. Great recruiters are consultative when they're like, let's really narrow it down. So you got to really know who you're looking for and what you're looking for. From that lens, you just try to figure out how to get your phone ringing. So it's not calling each person. It's like, where are they online? Are they in groups? Are they going to conferences? Are they on the sports lines? You have to figure out the DNA of who you're hiring and then say, where do they social? And then you get to those places, because if you do the hand-to-hand combat, recruiting can be really long process. But
Yeah.
if you find a way, the best recruiters for sourcing figure out how to get their phone to ring with referrals versus call individuals. And same with companies.
Johnny, you were always great at, making sure we understood what we were looking for. Talk to us about your progression over the years of thinking about that.
I don't think it really ever changed. I had to narrow down exactly what I wanted in a person and put in the must-haves, and then have the nice-to-haves. And then next to each one of those, when I did get to, now I'm extending into interviewing, but it's still sourcing. Next to each one of those, I would have an open-ended question to open up the discussion on that characteristic or skill or knowledge that I was looking for in that person. And then it's basically becomes a checklist. They either have these things or they don't have these things. Now, if they don't have some of those things, then what you're doing is you're assuming some sort of risk. If you think that that is your ideal profile, and let's say they have 8 out of 10, but they don't have 2, now you're assuming risk in hiring that person. And what you have to now do is ask the people that are going to manage that person, how are we going to cover?
Right.
So if this person doesn't have this skill, they don't have that knowledge, how do we cover? Is there a training program to get them that knowledge? Great. So we're lowering our risk. Who's going to manage this person? Okay, does that manager have that skill set so they can help develop it in the rep? So I think that's really important, not only from a sourcing perspective to understand who the candidate is, but also to understand when you go through the list, have the open-ended questions, you have your checklist, and now what risks are you assuming, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people would come in and say, we really have to hire this guy. Why? Well, he played football at Notre Dame and he's really good guy, and I could spend a week in a boat with him and have a beer with him. Great. Now let's walk through the checklist,
And they do the
and then
job.
all of a sudden things fall apart, right? And then it's great that he played football and maybe he's competitive, but it may not make up for all the other risks that we're going to assume that we can't cover, especially when I was in a really small company. You didn't have the resources to cover. You didn't have extensive training programs. You didn't have enough managers that maybe had the skill set to help develop the person. So, I think this candidate profile goes far beyond just sourcing.
And Rick and Marcy, you've taken this to kind of another level you're actually using some tools that are helping in this kind of qualification. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing there?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Before she goes there, there's one point that sorry, Marcy, there's one point that I wanted to bring out to the audience on what Marcy had spoken about earlier. Is she was speaking about, getting people together and talking about the enthusiasm of why you work at this company. There's been times when I've gone into companies or taken over, for a company. And then I go in there and what I realize is the managers can't sell the deal.
Yeah.
They can't sell the opportunity. So even if they become really good at interviewing, when the candidate turns and says, well, what you got to tell me why I should work here. Crickets. I mean, they're salespeople and sales leaders, and they were awful at selling the opportunity. So I think that's a really important point that you brought up, Marcy.
Yeah, and I'd love to just continue on this one, because I think you're highlighting what's so important. So you as a leader finding somebody, you're just eliminating the guesswork, but you're still in the driver's seat. You personally have been in the driver's seat. You're not making you're not the last one, and I'll give the final stamp after the team. Like from the beginning, you're involved and you're just eliminating the guesswork. And then from the candidate's point of view, that's your same job. So there are a lot of companies that love you because you played football at Notre Dame and they love you because you're great. You want to have a beer with them. But one of the reasons why you end up not staying is you don't like the job and you don't have the skills to do the job and they don't have the training to do it. So candidates on the same time, it's very appropriate for you to eliminate guesswork. And if they're not sharing this, ask those questions. Like, what does it take to be successful? Like, where will I struggle? And then if there is struggle, is that a skill, competency? How would I kind of overcome that? And how did you overcome it? But candidates equal responsibility to do two things: eliminate the guesswork and get the ultimate decision maker in the interview process a lot sooner than most companies. Most companies have like this ivory tower thing. They're like, well, we don't want to, make Johnny Mac, he's so busy. You'll interview after you spend 30 hours with us. You want to try and get them in earlier in the game. So we're
going to talk about that in the process, where I think follow-up in this industry on both sides is just horrific. And you're a walking audition for what you're selling to this candidate. And if you don't get back to people, and we can't get them with John McMahon until 3 weeks or 4 weeks, the A players, they're not sticking around.
They're gone. They're gone.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
That's why you're missing people.
Let's do this on the sourcing piece. So I want to give a little hack too. Marcy, you said 3 names. I'm a big believer in that. I call it the 3-name game. That, excuse me, no matter who I'm interviewing with, no matter who I'm talking to, I'm always looking for 3 names. Mm-hmm. And I have taken some bad interviews. I want to qualify that. I have taken some interviews that I knew probably were not going to work out, but I had to do some teaching to my recruiters, to my hiring managers. I had to own this thing and say, if I just tell them you suck at recruiting, bring me somebody else, nobody's going to learn. And so what I would constantly do, and I just did it the other day. I took an interview. I knew that, and I call them outliers. It doesn't make them bad people. There's outliers that Johnny was talking about. You have an ideal candidate profile, and one outlier is a problem they have to cover. Johnny talks about they have to cover 2 outliers, no chance. And I always say, who inside the company do we know that has these 2 outliers that's being successful? It's really simple for me. Doesn't make them bad people. Now, what I've also found is I get 3 names from people that I'm recruiting that I know are not a fit. And I just ask them things like, are you the number one person in your company? And either they lie or they say they aren't. And I say, okay, let's kind of just walk through a scenario. Tell me who's number one. And I just ask them, if they're competitive, and I kind of ask them some discovery questions around that to understand what they do, and how they speak about that person tells me 2 things. It tells me what that other person's like. And number 2, it tells me if they're saying, well, the only reason why they're good, they got the best territory, they have a relationship with the hiring manager, then it just kind of reinforces my outliers. But here's a good one. When we find somebody we really like, and you got to just get, sourcing is where the work gets put in. I tell people before they can come, before they can sign with us, we've done a great job. They want us. We want them. You got to give me 3 names. Because if you believe in what we're doing here and we're growing, you got to help in this endeavor right up front. I find that people are most likely to give those names when they want a job than any other time in the candidate or the person's profile. So write that one down, the 3-name game. I think that's critical.
Yeah. Well, it's so good. And it feels to me, when you have a salesperson that's willing to give names, they want to work with winners. So they're giving you, they're showing their confidence. They're like, yeah, absolutely. Here's 3 names. I'm still going to, we're going to rise the tide together. And they get excited to work with winners. So love that. And it is such a good way of keeping the sourcing up. You just never want to get desperate with candidates. Even if you think you're not hiring, you heard all the stats in the beginning. You have people on your team that are leaving, or you have people on your team that aren't that engaged. So there's going to be somebody that breaks the 4-minute mile on your team. Got to always be interviewing, always networking. Just keep your phone ringing with referrals. And that way you're never desperate. You're always, you've got some people that you're kind of reeling in. And then when the timing is right, you have the right people that you can call, because you're like, we've got the opportunity for you right now. So that's really the secret, is just to never get desperate and always be recruiting.
I agree
Yeah.
with that 100%.
Yeah, Johnny, you
You
actually
can't be
talked about
desperate because
this,
then
though.
you just fill the spot. And what happens is 6 to 9 months later, or even before that, they churn.
But
Yeah,
Johnny,
And
they're
as
talk
a
about
complaining
leader,
that
about
you're
though.
in
their
real trouble.
territory. Yeah.
John, let's talk about that though, because you built one of the greatest sales machines in the history of software. And you made it clear that our number one job was recruiting. And we went from 0 to $1 billion in less than 10 years. The stock split 5 times in 7 years. You knew right away that it was going to be about the quality of the people that we put out on the field. And I saw you do it. I saw you do it when we would go through the forecast. Marcy, on every forecast call, before we start the forecast, John would ask us who we recruited this week. How many interviews did you do this week? Well, how many people do you have in the pipeline? John, how did you drive that kind of, from the top? And I remember you didn't promote some people, John, that couldn't recruit. So they were great at doing deals. They were great, but if they couldn't recruit and they didn't have a history of bringing people in the company, you didn't promote them to like the regional jobs,
Or I would demote them.
or you demote them. Yeah.
Because once you have like 50 or 60, first line leaders, and then, everyone else is recruiting, but 2 people aren't recruiting. And then they have all the excuses as to why they're not recruiting. What you start to realize is maybe the outside world knows a little bit more about my leader than I do.
Ooh.
And then because A players are looking at that leader and saying, is this person going to coach me? Do I believe in this person? I'm here to be in a growth company. Do I believe that this person's capable of going to the next level and next level so I can rise with them? If they can't answer those questions, or they find out, I really don't think this is the person that's going to take me to the promised land, the A players are gone. Goodbye. See you later. And then you realize, my leader's really good. They can sell. In fact, they're probably selling on behalf of the other 5 reps in the territory, but they just can't lead and they can't recruit. So I gotta take them down a notch.
Yeah. And now we're talking about this. There's people listening that are going, what are these birds talking about? The technology economy has been difficult. We're not hiring. Like, I always believe, and again, I called it, the 3-name game. Somebody's going to leave. These statistics just told us that. Somebody's going to leave. Somebody should leave. And somebody's going to surprise you.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So what I used to say is, no matter how many open head recs we had, you have to have 3 names. You have to have 3 people in the pipeline. And so I want people to listen to this. A players are not on monster.com and those kind of things. Marcy, talk about that a little bit, the mentality of the candidates.
Yeah, from the candidate point of view, it's almost like you just can reverse this conversation. You want to always be networking. You want to always be out there, like looking for, other places where you can win, and doing it in a way that's just, it's right for you. So you also are never desperate. But I think what's really important is when you know exactly who you are, like as a person good in technology, and you feel like it's time for you to start looking elsewhere, you have to do the work. So I know so many people that have left companies, and when they're looking for the next job, it's their full-time job. They're spending 10, 15 hours a week getting out there, networking, meeting with people. And then you have a lot of people that they are struggling. They don't want to stay where they are, but they're like at nighttime, maybe going on the job boards and doing stuff like that. It's just not enough. You got to it's always people connecting with people is the way to stay on top of your game with the best career or the best talent. And there's nothing other than to say it just takes work.
And
your
I
job
agree
is
with
making
you.
your world big.
Well, Marcy, the flip side of that's true too. Like I get calls sometimes and people say, hey, can you help me? I'm thinking about switching jobs. And I go, okay, tell me about the opportunities that you have. Oh, well, I only have one. Oh, you've narrowed it down? No, I got a call from a recruiter.
Right.
So you got a call from a recruiter and now you're asking me to help you. So what is your profile? What are you looking for in a company? And then you get crickets. So they're only looking at the opportunity because a recruiter called them. They haven't really done the homework that you're talking about. And that's also why sometimes people wash out too.
Well, it's sometimes you just have to get creative with how you're doing networking. So if you're at a company, you don't want to be out there because most of our industries are small, and then you are revealing you're leaving, and then that's not a good story. but there's so many things you can do. There's boards you can join. There's a lot of ways to network without saying I'm networking because I want a job. But you start networking and you have the appropriate way to stay in front of people. You're making your world bigger is the main trick.
Yeah, the other thing I believe in is this energy management. So people talk about time management. I don't believe time management exists. Maybe that's just me. I suck at it. But what I believe in energy management. So I always ask people, if you're out there listening right now and you're like, hey, tell me the best job you've ever had. Hopefully it's the one you're in, but tell me the best job. Why was that the best job? What are the 3 things you loved most about that job? What gives you energy about that job? And people do a pretty good job of kind of telling me that, but mostly I find out it's a different job than they're in right now. And then I ask, talk to me about the worst job you've ever had. Why was it the worst job you ever had? Tell me the amount of energy that was spent on things that you couldn't stand. And so for me, for candidates, for people just thinking about, I try to get them in that energy space that says these types of things give me energy. Because you know what? The Grim Reaper comes calling. If you get a great job, oh, they offered me all this money. They offered me to work from home or whatever you're doing. And you tell yourself, and you're not honest with things that give you energy and things that do not give you energy. That's your responsibility. And when you're interviewing, which we're going to move into in a second, when you're interviewing, you better find out about those specific tasks. What and how are we going about doing what you want people to do? But that's the candidate's responsibility. And it's the interviewer responsibility to uncover that for sure. Yeah. So that's that's the two-sided there.
Yeah, time. We always say time is finite. Like 24 hours in the day, it doesn't matter who you are. That's how much time you have. But energy is fully renewable. So how you kind of renew your energy and the right things. And I know we want to talk about interviewing and best practices there. Getting your energy right when you're networking is the most important thing. So if you turn on your computer late at night to find another job and you're complaining about, you're just in a bad energy state, like you hate the situation you're in, you are not going to find the job with that energy. You don't think as creatively. There's actually, like, when you have depleted energy, your brain doesn't fire the right level. It's like you can watch brain waves, and if you study that work. So if you're in a good space, you think differently, you email differently, you work harder. So you got to get yourself fired up, just like you would before a game. You get yourself fired up, you play better. So you want to make sure when you network, when you're interviewing, you're protecting. You're looking for the right thing, and you kind of know where you are, and you got a great headspace about it.
Well, on that subject, I get calls all the time where people want me to counsel them on a new opportunity that they have. This is especially happens with leaders, but it does happen also with, sales reps. But the leader will tell me, if we use them as an example, they'll tell me about this opportunity. And they'll tell me about the position. They'll tell me, let's say, about 2 companies that they've narrowed it down to. One is all about the position. They can be a VP level. Mm-hmm. But then when you ask about the opportunity, it sounds like a mediocre company. And that's the way they described it to me. Then they tell me about the other company that has a rocket ship opportunity, but the title is maybe director. So I counsel them to go to the opportunity with the lower title, because 2 to 3 years from now, if the company's grown and you do a great job, you'll be a VP, and maybe even beyond that. You'll make more money. You'll be around better people with a better opportunity, and it'll look best on your resume if you want to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. 90% of the time, the people pick the position.
The title.
They can't separate themselves from their ego, and their ego makes the decision. Then they call me back 2 years later and say, John, you were right. And I said, look, this isn't about me being right. I was trying to steer you onto the right opportunity, and you let your ego make the decision. Mm-hmm. So they confuse opportunity with position a lot. And even reps do it because they go into a startup, and the startup tells them, well, we'll give you all this stock, but the company's not really going anywhere. So that stock's never going to be worth anything. So they're confusing the position again with the opportunity.
No doubt. Marcy, let's talk about this interviewing and screening. Again, we're talking about putting in the work, both sides of this coin. You got to put in the work. Let's talk about interviewing and screening and the work that should be done there and some of the common pitfalls, and we'll talk about overcoming those. But what do you see there?
Again, time. People are not allocating time to do it right. So I just can't emphasize it. The worst is when you don't have enough time and you have other people start the process, they definitely don't. If they're in the weeds, like sellers, and you're having them do like half day shadows or things like that, they're not even prepped. But I really feel like you can't be afraid to ask tough questions. So it is helpful when the company has, pretty strict, tough questions that everybody has to ask. They can use their own language, but then some sort of scorecard afterwards so you can compare. So you're not kind of doing the buddy check, you're doing more so the skills checks, like how did they answer this question for you? So you can kind of compare notes, but make the time, ask the tough questions, huddle together afterwards to compare notes, like how you really scored the person. Because really during the interviewing and screening process, if you're doing it right, you should be treating this person as if they joined the team, and that person's getting more and more confident that they want to work for you, with you, win with you, because the whole interview process is just like, what does winning look like? And can this person be a winner almost immediately? So if you eliminate the guesswork, it's not that complicated. You just kind of use your natural curiosity.
Johnny, this is like discovery on the sales engagement side, and it's about preparation. And I know we were talking before we got started today, Johnny, you have used tools before. We can't have everybody asking the same questions. There's got to be a process. And I call it like a walking audition. How you interview these people is how you're interviewed. You should expect that's what you're going to see in the company. If they don't follow up, if they take 2 weeks to come back, if they don't know who the next person in the process is or what have you, that's a problem on both sides. But let's talk about some of the things we can do to prepare. Marcy, let's start with you with some of your thoughts and what you're actually doing and coaching people to do.
For
how do we prepare? Yeah. No. Let's talk about both sides. Either way, candidates or companies. And I know you're using some tools to do that.
Yeah. So for companies, the one technology that I do love and I do recommend, it is what I invested in this for Revel Coach. And it's one of the best leadership, teamwork, communication tools I've ever seen. And it's called Cloverleaf is the name of it. I bought a license for us because the results we get when people have a better point of view of how people operate for themselves and for other people. People are complicated. So if you demystify, this is a person that makes decisions with more facts. This is a person that makes more decisions based on instinct. You go differently when you interact with each other. So we've been using that at Revel Coach for, really since I guess about 3 years we've been using it. Incredible results. When we started Revel Search, we now use that tool as a part of our screening process, not necessarily because I feel like technology can tell me if the person's right or not. I don't actually like personality assessments for green light, red light on a person.
But yeah, why? Because there's a lot of people who do. So why do you do that?
Well, I will say,
I agree with you, by the way.
Yeah, like Cloverleaf, they use 10 personality assessments. It's all the top ones. It's Myers-Briggs, it's DISC, it's Strength Finders, it's all that. And when I have a team's dashboard, there will be 2 of us that are identical on one personality assessment, and on another personal assessment, we're not really that similar. So if you lean too heavy on one, you are missing so many other facets about another person. And I always just say, like, I don't know how this science behind personality assessments work, but these PhDs do a great job of asking the most ridiculous questions. And then it puts you in a box and helps you define yourself. So I like knowing that. It does help you with stress management and all that. But when it comes to hiring, there is a human that you are hiring that has a personality that under stress, they might act a certain way. Under confidence, they act a different way. When you're interviewing, you don't really know the full person. So it's really great to have something that gets you to know the person better. So in our preparation, we always, with our Revel Search clients, we suggest from a team perspective, they use this tool. So it's nice for them. It's a added perk for them, but they get the technology and they get results. It's an automated coaching tool. So you get like daily tips and you can search, how to have a difficult conversation with John Kaplan, and you learn about each other, but we can see the team dynamics when somebody comes as a potential candidate, we actually can see how they would interact with the others. And we could see potential clash points, or we can see potential wins. So it just helps us prep for better questions. It doesn't help us decide if they're right or wrong, but really more that cultural fit.
I love that. And Johnny, you've been high on this. Force Management's high on it too as well. You've been high on this for bringing a little bit of science into the mix of finding some things out. So what do you use it for, and what do you caution people with?
Well, first, before that, I think I just want to stress again that if you don't write down the position profile and you don't really truly understand the position profile, and the position profile has to have been built by somebody that lived in that job, in that position. If you don't have that, then I don't think any of this other stuff matters. But I used to use a tool called Profiles from a company called Profiles International. They had a Profiles XT, which was based on salespeople. And what you're doing is, it's not really a personality test. They look at your behavioral traits. So everything from, let's say, learning index, manageability, independence, those types of things. And what you're doing is you're comparing it against, let's say, the top 10 people in your sales force that are doing really well at this point in this growth period of your company, which is really important because that could change 2 years from now as your company grows. And then what you're doing is you're asking the candidate, if you like them, to take the same assessment. And if they match to those top 10 people that are doing really well at your company, they'd almost be stupid not to take the job, because there's a huge earning opportunity right in front of them. They're like a perfect fit. If they're not a match, it doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that at this point in time, they're just not a really good fit. They don't match up to the top 10 people in your sales force.
Yeah, for me, this fit is so critical. And I had to explain it to some people on my team. I just did this a couple weeks ago. We had a candidate that had some outliers. I decided to interview them because they were told that they were going to interview with me. And I think that's rude if all of a sudden somebody goes back and says, well, he's not going to interview you now. So that was on us, not on the candidate. So as I went through, one of the outliers was, and this was really, really, really reflective for me. One of the outliers was in some of their reasoning capability. And I could tell by the way people are talking about reasoning, they're like, yeah, they're not smart. They're not. And I'm like, time out. You understand what what we use is something that tells us, and I use the example of like the Navy SEALs. Let's say we have a team of Navy SEALs. That makeup has people that do things and think about things and do certain things this way. There's no Navy SEALs that go out there by themselves. In the history of Navy SEALs, they never went out by themselves. They always went out in teams, which is a great analogy here. Well, somebody's responsible for, sniping. Somebody's responsible for scouting. Somebody's responsible for blowing stuff up or whatever. I hate to use war analogies. I'm sorry, but I think this one will make sense. Now they bring another Navy SEAL on. She's fit. She does this incredibly well. She doesn't do these three things very well, but we like her so much, we think she could be part of the team. And then when they actually get into combat, they're covering, like Johnny said. They're covering, and something is lost. So that's from the team perspective. Now for the individual. It was awesome I had this conversation. I believe the good ones, the good profile tests, tell us where people's natural resting state is. It doesn't mean they can't do the job. It just means it's not their natural resting state. And what that means is they're going to have to create energy. The energy isn't given to them. They got to create the energy to go do XYZ tasks. And I believe they can do it. I mean, I just believe in the human spirit. People can do it. And then they spend a lot of time trying to convince themselves and the company they're interviewing with. We saw this a lot at PTC, Johnny. They said, we can do it. We can do that environment or what have you. And a lot of times, if they just weren't being honest with themselves and we weren't being honest with them, those people always struggled. Because either somebody struggled inside the company working with them, or they struggled because they weren't in their natural resting state. So I just wanted to say that because I got a pet peeve about it. People get these profile test or whatever, and they'll say internally, go, oh, this person's stupid, or this person doesn't make decisions. What you're saying is there's a difference. There's an outlier aspect to our current people who are successful in the job. That's what they tell you. Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fully aligned with that. Fully. And I feel like with interviewing, and this is you as a candidate or you as a hiring, your job is to know, will I be successful in the first 90 days or not?
Yeah.
And there's a whole thing on onboarding because a lot of companies, they drag it out. And so leaders are like, let me know when you're done, and then we'll talk about the real stuff we do. And like, it's just a mistake. You gotta eliminate that guesswork. And that's on both parties. And knowing that neither party's that great at it traditionally, then you just work a little bit harder. You ask better questions. It's like, it's getting prepared for a good sales call. You got to know how to ask the question to lead them down a path to make sure if you'll be successful or not. And
Let's
I think
talk about some of these questions. If you could ask one, I'll give my first one here. For me, I want to know, what's the toughest thing somebody has ever done? And I'm not trying to find you tough person, blah, blah, blah. I want to know. And I also ask them about failures early. If you're a candidate, be ready for that question. Mm-hmm. A lot of people aren't comfortable talking about their failures, but what we find is people who've connected with their own failures have a much better outlook about their successes. So, Marcy, let's talk about some of these questions and preparing. I know people shy away from that one. That one, I think, is critical.
Yeah, I think human nature, people don't want to ask people tough stories because it's almost like, I feel like it's none of my business. But if it's a sales role, you got to know that answer. Yeah. And I think as an individual, you have those stories in you. So you kind of have to take the time to like articulate it in a way that it's appropriate, how you shared, how you overcame it. For mine, 100%, I like those. I also love just your legacy question, like who, because of you, is better. And what I'm looking for is not just people that they train and they mentor and they can say this person got promoted because of me and that person got promoted because of me. But I also love hearing customers. Like when a salesperson, when you're hiring someone, you ask that question, who because of you is better? And they're better at their job, they're more happy, they're all these things. And when they use an example of a customer they impacted, that to me shows they got what they were selling, what they did mattered because they saw it in action through a customer. But it's a good question to just kind of see how strong their legacy and how much they care about growing more than just themselves.
Love that. Johnny?
I think what I try to do is ask a question that's going to open it up so that I can ask like 10 or 15 additional questions behind it. Because what I'm trying to do is not ask superficial questions. Oh, where'd you go to school? I can read that on the resume, or, what color do you like, or some stuff like that. I want to get inside them. I want to get inside their head. I want to get inside their soul. And I want to really understand who they are. Who am I really speaking to here? So whatever the question is, if it's the most difficult situation you've ever been in, the most competitive situation you've ever been in, any of those types of questions aren't just to ask the first question. It's got to be because you're going to listen very carefully and you're going to ask 10 or 20 additional questions to get inside that person. That's where the power is in the interview.
Love that. Marcy, how about the process? I find companies suck at this, and I'm not being, I am being a little bit critical because I've sucked at it before in the past. If you're, let's just talk about seller. If you're a seller and you are, or a sales leader, whatever, if you're in sales and you don't qualify the process, that's on you. Mm-hmm. But if you're also the hiring company and you don't have a process, like that is just like, why would you go work for a company that can't tell you when the next interview is? They can't. And I find that people will tell me, they'll be like, I'll say, well, how'd that interview go? They go, oh, I think it went good. And I'll be like, well, what does that mean? What's the next step? Well, they said they were going to get back to me or whatever. I got to tell you, if you're not clear, if you're a hiring company, you're not clear in your process. And if you're a candidate, if you're not qualifying that process, that's a walking audition for both of you.
Your process takes too long, which I've seen a lot of people
way too long
go out because it's almost an indicator of the company you're going to work for. Mm-hmm. If they take 6 weeks to get me through this interview process, I don't want to work for them.
Right.
The other thing I'm looking at is how long it takes them to get the offer letter out. If they offer me the job
Yes.
today and they take 2 or 3 days to get the offer letter out, I don't want to work there. They've told me everything I need to know about that company.
Yes.
You know, when there were candidates that I liked, sometimes I'd say, hold on a second. Do you mind if I go to the restroom? I go down to HR, I print out an offer letter right now. I come back in the office and I put it right in front of them. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want them to get away. I want them to sign now. Sometimes they say, well, I can't sign. Well, who do we need to talk to? I need to talk to my wife or my husband. Great. Let's call him right now.
Yeah. Yes. And he's not kidding.
Now,
That's
I know. It's so good.
because
I mean,
when you have an A player in your office, you cannot let them get away. And you can't let, 6 weeks or 3 days to get an offer letter out. You can't do those things.
when you think about A players and what they want, they like when they know, and they're ready to they're good decision makers. And
Right.
that's why you got to get the decision maker in the process early. And like John, what you had mentioned, like if your internal team sets you up with an interview that was a waste of your time because the person wasn't right, it wasn't a waste of your time if you're a good leader, because you're like, I'm going to give you guys a pass on that one, but here's all the things I didn't see. Here's all the screening you didn't do. Here's how you could have made it faster. Just don't do that again. But you try to get in the interview process as quick as possible, because the top players, they want to hear from you. And if it's not important, then you can have everybody else do it. But for most people, hiring the best salesperson, that's the number one job of a CRO. And so I don't know why you wouldn't get involved early on, so you don't waste hours of your time.
And there can't be any wasted time. So whatever time you use, there can't be any wasted time. So like in this example, not only did I tell the candidate, I got down to the natural resting state of the candidate. The candidate agreed with me that they weren't a fit. But since we put him through that process, he took a test. Guess what I'm doing? I'm helping that candidate go get a job that's a better fit for him, because I want our legacy. I want our credibility in the marketplace. And this was a very good person. They just were not a fit for that team that we were talking about. Okay. Now the second thing is I followed it all the way through to where did we get this person from? Well, we got this person from one of the partners that we use that are out there sourcing candidates. I said, great, let's get him on the phone. And I got him on the phone and we talked about it, and everybody's all nervous. Oh, we didn't like the candidate? Why does he want us on the phone? Everybody thinks I'm going to yell at people. And I said, hey, walk me through why you sent this person to us. What did you like about them? What red flags did you see? And I saw that they saw all the same red flags that I found. Which was good news. Then I said, why did you send them to us? And they were like, well, the good person. I said, hey, you're our partner. And Marcy, you guys taught me this back at the old days of Tech Systems. I took them through the highlighter test. Now I said to my people, I want them to present candidates to you. Present them to you. This is why I believe this person's a fit for the job. Here's an outlier we found, but we've overcome that outlier because of X, Y, and Z. If you don't get to that level of conversation, you're going to be spinning your wheels and you're going to suck at recruiting.
And you just brought up another good point. The recruiting industry is huge. It's, trillions of dollars. So a lot of people, a lot of listeners are using recruiters right now, but they treat them like this distant person. They treat them, they don't give them time. So then the recruiters are just guessing. Your requirements may be a priority, maybe not a priority, but you're competing against all the other requirements. So don't be afraid of giving a recruiter an exclusive. Like if you are leaning on a recruiter because you're like, I am going to pay somebody else a lot of money to find me the person, make the time. Get the phone with their boss, get the recruiters on the call, give them the tools they need to find the right person. And then same thing like internal, don't let them waste your time. Right. And it's just a matter of whoever is getting you the sources, you got to make sure you make the time to make sure they really get it just like you get it. So they're representing your brand in the same way that you would. So the A players are like, sweet, get me with the decision maker as fast as possible, because this is a place I want to work. But if you don't do that, recruiters are kind of representing your opportunity. Okay. They're kind of not really knowing, and you are wasting company time if you're not doing it right.
I agree 100%. I want to go back to the interview. And as an interviewer, I think the number one skill that you can have is listening. And I find that a lot of people just are poor listeners. They're not truly listening to what the candidate's saying. Or they're asking a question and the candidate's answering a different question. And if, as a good listener, you got to bring them back on track and get them to answer your question, and then you're going to give them their time when they can ask questions. But when it's your time to ask questions, you have to be a great listener. You have to turn all the other distractions off and just listen.
Yeah.
Most people can't do that. They can't.
Yeah. And if they're not going to be a great salesperson. Like if you really want that elite sales team, it's part of the job.
And on both sides, it's about preparation, Johnny. I found that you can be a much better listener when you're prepared, when you understand your content, when you know what questions you're going to ask, when you know what answers or areas of concern that you're looking to go in. You can be a much better listener when you're not trying to figure out what the next thing, you have to say. I think that's one of the biggest problems that people have.
I mean, I could tell you a story. So this is, it's a while ago, but it's when everybody wore suits, and I'm in the Milano, Italy office, and everybody's got their, amazing, suits on, and everybody's got their hair slicked back and, great shoes and everything. And somebody comes in the office, says, "Hey, your candidate's here, your next interview candidate." In walks a guy. And back then everybody was clean shaven.
Yeah.
So in walks a guy with a 5-day-old beard. He's got tan corduroy pants, but the big cords, really big cords. He's got a purple jacket and a black turtleneck. He's supposed to be wearing a tie and a suit. And when he smiles at me to introduce himself, he's got 2 chipped teeth in the front, and his hair looked like he just, cut it himself really sloppy with, some automatic shavers. So I was like, well, what the hell did they present me with? Like, this is so out of character of the people that we hire. But I decided, okay, I'm just going to give it a shot here, and I'm going to ask this person some questions. And the questions, the way they answered the questions was unbelievable. There's a guy named Carlo Carpinelli. He turned out to be the #1 salesperson in the company. And if I would have just not listened and immediately threw him out just because of the way he looked, I would have done myself a real disservice. Instead, I decided, okay, I'm going to really listen. Does he fit the profile? Can he fit inside this company? And it was a grand slam home run. But it was all about deciding that I'm just going to listen to this person.
Wow. That's awesome. Marcy, we got a little bit of time left. I want to talk about, and if we don't get to it all, we can certainly have you back. Our audience loves you, and we love the content that you bring to us. Let's talk about the third leg of this the stool here that you're talking about, which was onboarding and some of the key things that you're seeing on onboarding. Like, there are big mistakes that are made. You do such a great job in sourcing. You do such a great job in interviewing, and then you suck at onboarding. Tell us what you're seeing.
Well, that's definitely one that people intellectually and emotionally allow to be outsourced to somebody else. And usually onboarding processes for some of the great companies, initially it had like a very good intention to it. But if you hire people that are, you've got people that are means oriented, process oriented, you've got people that are goal oriented. Onboarding and teaching the processes is a different gene than what they hired the person for. So you just have somebody that they hate all the modules. They're not even going through they're like the racehorse waiting for the starter to go, and you're just missing all that energy. So the energy of them thinking they're going to be phenomenal, that should start like the same time that they are getting the offer from you. They should start looking at their forecast, how they could do the right, like social media introduction engagement with your people. And you've got to get them excited. So I value the process that companies have to go through that teach them the language and things like that. But I just absolutely have 100% seen that if the leader and the leader's leader wait until the person's ready, you just missed a window of time, and that person they're that much less engaged in terms of their long-term success.
Yeah, agree.
That's great advice. Yeah, I think you're right. I think for me, it's like the life cycle of a hire. And not only that is in performance management. So you told us in the statistics that we saw that one of the number one reasons why people leave is because they're not doing what they thought they were going to be doing. So the expectations were not set correctly. Well, you have an opportunity, you have a window, and it's clear this window is 90 days, 90 days from this data. You have an opportunity, and a lot of companies like sticking them in product training for, 60 of those 90 days or what have you. So I just think that when you think about it holistically as a process and a life cycle, you're going back for feedback, and and then you're asking them, for candidates, and then it all starts again. So there's no end to this recruiting. That's why they call it, attracting and retaining top employees. So I think it's an incredible piece. Marcy, you had a little bit of an offer for our people that I thought was really cool. Could you kind of tell us what you're thinking?
Yeah. Well, the technology I mentioned, I love Cloverleaf. It's a great tool for existing teams. This is the one I know we use it for screening, but it's more dependent on like team and leadership integration of people. So with our company and our license, we're able to give a link, and Rachel can put it in the show notes, but you can create a free organization, and then you and your team can use this tool, and you don't have to put a credit card down or anything. So it's 6 months that you can use this tool, and you can just play with it, enjoy it, and really see how your team will change when they start having increased self-awareness and increased appreciation, understanding of each other. So I'd love for your community to take advantage of that.
That's awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you for that. That's awesome. Johnny, some last thoughts from you.
No, I mean, it was amazing, Marcy. Thank you so much. We covered, I feel like we covered, maybe half of what we
always do.
Because I really wanted to also ask Marcy, where she's really almost an expert on this, on the burnout piece too. So maybe we have to have her back to talk a little bit more about.
Let's do that.
The recruiting process, and also what happens after, during onboarding and after onboarding, to get people engaged and keep them engaged.
Yeah,
especially
Johnny,
when we talked about, culture, expectations, those types of things where people churn out.
Let's do that for sure. You up for that, Marcy? Because we've got a series right now we're doing with Doug Holliday that is, really talking about people kind of rethinking their definition of success. You're an expert in the burnout end, and we'll bring those two worlds together. I think that'll be a great idea.
Yeah, I'd love to.
How can we find you, Marcy? So like Revel Search, talk to us a little bit about your ideal customer profile. Who's a great, profile for you as a company or a candidate, or what? How do you do that?
Yeah, thank you. So the Revel Search is the company that we are hiring entrepreneurs, independent people who are great at connecting people, and they really care about both the candidate and the company. So we are an executive search firm. So we are looking for adding people to our team. And then each one of our we call them Revel Scouts. Each one of them, we have a business model that will support their niche. So we have all the tools and technology for recruiting with AI and how to get them the support they need. But when we are working with our clients, we want to work with companies that care about the onboarding experience, because we've built our process to include 90 days of free executive coaching that's complimentary, because we just know it's so important to get that. If you get the sourcing, the screening, and the onboarding right, everything works. So we are a referral-based company, and we know that that's the center, that's the epicenter where we want to really be successful.
That's awesome. And how do they reach you? I know you're on LinkedIn, you're in social. How do they reach you?
Yeah, I'm at Marcy Stoudt for LinkedIn, and then both of our companies have company pages. So you can either go to Revel Search or Revel Coach, and we are positioned as one company, but we have two different service offerings between the two.
You're awesome. You're awesome. Thank you again for coming, and we're going to have you back to talk about the burnout piece. Johnny, bring us home.
Marcy, thanks a lot. Great to see you again. Thanks to Cap, thanks to Marcy, and thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.